Alright, so we just finished up the scene where Ren was summoning Archer. The dynamic duo is now in full effect. And after his summoning, Archer goes into talking about what he is and isn't going to do under her supervision. So Ren says, fine, I'll just use my command spells and you'll do what I say regardless. And then Archer has to explain to her that she used it in the wrong way. He tells her that using a command spell for absolute obedience is practically useless because it's too broad of a command. He tells her that the command spells work better if the things that you tell the servant to do is more precise. So instead of telling him to obey everything she says, she's better off telling him, use this phantasm instantly from this distance. Something that's actually plausible. That way a servant could bypass the phantasm charge time, which could easily make or break an entire fight. The command spells are just minor levels of magic. It lies somewhere in the middle. With them being a part of the third magic ritual, it's like a person is harnessing a fragment of that same power, which in turn gives them access to extraordinary things. Beyond forming a contract with the servant, they're meant for magical boosts or magical restraints, but usually they're better when they're used to accentuate the servant. Command spells, which are the proof that you are a master, you got 3 chances. Strike 1, strike 2, strike 3. And once you lose them all, it's over. You're out the race, unless you can find a way to get back in it. So it's ideal that you're very careful about the way that you use them and what you use them for. Again, losing the command spells does make you break contract with the servant, so you do lose access to certain things like being able to communicate telepathically with them if you had that, providing them with magical energy to stay in the world, being able to force them to do things with command spells, etc. But once you get outside the main series, they kind of just get to doing whatever. So as long as that contract is in place, they were going to obey your orders on a minimal level anyway. Now, whether or not they want to obey all of them is completely up to them. Some servants are mentally stronger than others, so even if you force them to do an order, they can still resist you multiple times. It's really a matter of who you summon. You know, we've seen it with Tokiomi and Gil. Gil having a high mental fortitude off of his EX independent action alone, and if we're being honest, Gil had more allegiance to Kirei before he even made a contract with him, and that's of his own volition. And if you're lucky to have a servant that's obedient enough, you can send somebody else out in your place, making it even safer for you. Things like Irisville operating as a stand-in master for Saber, Mimum being a stand-in master for Percival, so it really is up to them. The command spells are just there to reinforce it. So if you get a servant that's just evil like Prelati, or just doesn't really care, then you're screwed. The command spells were created by Zoken after the Second Grail War. During that war, they tried to bring the servants out. Nobody was listening. The servants pretty much did whatever they wanted to, and it just ended up in a bloodbath. So by the third time that it came around, Zoken made the command spells so we could get some actual order going. So that's a pretty big feat for him. Funny that Zoken is the guy that we look to for order, considering what he's turned into now, but it was a different time. He also made the Book of False Attendant for Shinji, which gave him temporary authority over Medusa when Medusa was never really his actual servant. Sakura still remained as the master, but by placing one of her command spells in the book, he could then use the book to control Medusa in her stead. Very useful and a very witty play on Zoken. It's kind of crazy to think about how Shinji managed to blow that as well. It really all just boils down to him lacking the technique and the experience to be an actual master. You can give anybody the keys to a Ferrari, but if they don't know how to drive, they're still gonna run into a wall. So not too surprising there. Then you got the situations where you can adopt command spells so you can have more. Certain events like Bad End 3, when Medea gets a hold of Shiro and she straight up cuts off his entire arm and takes all of his command spells. Kirei in Phase Zero, when he salvaged all the command spells from his late father, and that's how he ended up with an entire sleeve worth of command spells that he could just use at his disposal at any time, a lot of which helped him survive fatal blows from Kirisugu during their fight. They're pretty huge, whether you use them on a servant or you use them on yourself. And now that I bring up Kirei using them against Kirisugu, I would really like somebody to find a way that they can be used more often as a master. Now, the reason that Kirei used his is because he doesn't have an actual magic crest, so that served as his magic crest. But it would still be cool to see somebody else do it in the same way, because it made that fight that much more technical, and you don't see that too often. It was really dope. Him using a command spell to force Ku to take his own life. One of the main reasons that the spells exist is for the end, because at the end of the ritual, the end of the Holy Grail War, when it's just you and your servant, you're supposed to use your final command spell to make your servant take his own life. They get sacrificed, and that way the Grail will be yours. It was when FGO came around where they did things differently, where Marsberry and Solomon won the war and Solomon didn't have to be sacrificed, and that pretty much leads into the main story. But in the main canon, that was the original intention. Now, I really haven't done a video going into command spells at great length. I'm probably gonna come back around and do that later on, but this has me thinking about so many things. Command spells have been used all over the place, going way back to Fate Zero when Tokiomi used his on Gil so he wouldn't fight against Lancelot. He considered forcing Gil to take down Gil's horror when Gil was straight up telling him, no, I'm not gonna do it, but then Tokiomi decided not to. As soon as the story starts, Shiro immediately wasted a command spell to stop Saber from fighting Archer, which is a scene coming up. Mordred using a command spell to survive Frankenstein, her using a command spell to blitz Semiramis, Sig using his command spells to reinforce himself throughout the war, Amakusa using his spells to negate Shakespeare from overturning his plan. As I mentioned before, Cordelion using all his command spells just to make Heracles obey him and accept the Grail Mud, Rin using command spells to make Saber destroy the Grail and the Grail monster, Kirisugu using his command spells to make Saber destroy the Grail and that. Even in Fate Extra CCC, right when the Mooncell Holy Grail War was about to kick off, Hakuno had to use all 3 of his command spells just to get Gil to talk to him. And Gil was like, you know what? You got balls, son. I like that. And he gave him a contract just off the strength. He didn't even have to take it. And in the Mooncell Holy Grail War, it's not like the regular command spells. If you use them all in the Mooncell, you immediately die, unless of course you're the main character. So Hakuno went through the whole war without having command spells and still kept Gilgamesh. You can also use command spells to teleport. One of my favorite uses is when Saber used the command spell to run through Emiya and Ataraxia. Can never forget it. And when I saw Raymina use her command spell to teleport Oslog to take down Sinfiali, it's the first scene that I thought of. In Ataraxia, there was a point where Shiro and Saber had to go against Emiya and he was patrolling the bridge, and the only way to get to Emiya is that you had to go across the bridge. So with him having the advantage and with him being able to shoot house-sized arrows, if you tried to just run straight across the bridge, the game would have you die every single time. So then they say bump it. They used the command spell to match his advantage, and she immediately teleported all the way across Fuyuki Bridge to the building where he was sniping from and one-shotted him. It was just so wild. And there was a lot of tactic involved there too, between the timing, the pacing. Shiro was literally calculating the intervals between the shots. So if he got that wrong, they still wouldn't have got through. And Shiro had to be present for Archer to even show up. So he's forced to use himself as bait, and he still tanked Archer's shot with Ro Ayas even after he was gone. Man, it even had me thinking about the Sirius lights that the Cryptors have. Now the Sirius lights are different. They're infinitely stronger than command spells, but they're still command spells in a way. And although it's thresholded to their territory, you got those doing things like completely overriding the Lost Belts, negating fate itself, blocking the alien god. The only problem is you gotta nuke yourself to use it. Like, it's ridiculous. And it also had me thinking how much of a threat Marsberry must be, because he's the one that gave it to them. He made Chaldea, he founded the fate system that gives us servants in FGO, and he gave them the Sirius lights. I guess he really isn't a lord for no reason. And now that all these theories are going around, it's it's starting to make sense. The rest of the day is Rin kind of just going through the city and reminiscing on different events that's happened, the environment. She talks a lot about Shinto, which is the more modern side of Fuyuki, where all of the main buildings are located, which is in development at the time of the war. You know, Fate Stay Night does take place in 2004. I have done videos on this. You know, we covered that in the Fate in Real Life video. Very well designed buildings. They look really great, and in person they look exactly like they do in the game, if you haven't seen that. And one of those skyscrapers is where Archer fired his shot at Heracles from. You got the fight between Saber and Medusa. Really love that one, when they're scaling up the walls and then just flying off the building and smacking each other around. There's a lot of times in Ataraxia where you have Bazette and Angra have a lot of dialogue between the two of them, and they kind of build a rapport that I'll always remember, just because Bazette is usually serious and Angra just likes to joke around. But like a lot of duos, they work really well together. They bounce off each other. You have Rin breaking down the Fuyuki name, saying that the reason that it's called Fuyuki in the first place, or winter tree, is because the winters there last so long, so it really stands out. And then she gets to the location where the great fire of Fuyuki happened. As you know, everything was wiped out. A bunch of kids ended up being orphans. Shiro lost his family, he lost his house, and I've seen people comment this on the channel before. It makes you wonder what happened to his family, what his family was doing prior to the fact, and what intentions did they have before all of that went down. It would be nice to see a spin in a different series where we can see his parents be actualized. We do know they're around in some series, but we still never get to see them, except those few shots and descriptions in the manga.